Coming up on today's Locked On Bucks, we recap a big win in Atlanta where the fourth quarter offense starting to look better and better. Frank and I dig into the details next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined by Frank Madden, as we thank you for checking out the Locked On Bucks newsletter. Still time to sign up for free at lockedondaily.com if you have not done so yet, and get your day started with the all-new free Locked On Bucks newsletter. It's a post-game recap. Here's the Bucks take down the Atlanta Hawks, 127-121 on the road in a game where, not to bury the lead, Giannis records another triple-double. 8 of 12 at the free throw line, as the free throw shooting in a small sample size has been much better of late in this stretch for Giannis as well. But Frank, a couple of things stood out to me outside of the performance of Giannis. Where do you want to start with this one? What was your biggest takeaway from the win?
I think again you saw the scoring balance, right? I think six guys in double digits, which has been especially important with Giannis. I guess he's not. I don't know if he's technically on a minutes limit. Well, I don't forget what he got to this tonight, but
32-ish, yeah.
Yeah, obviously he's not playing quite as many minutes. He hasn't hit 30 points in any game since the All-Star break, since returning. So a more muted scoring Giannis of late, and I think it's a bit interesting, right? Like previously there was that clear sort of third banana in theory, at least with Chris Middleton. Now you don't really, to me, have a third scorer. But I think what's happened is, Kyle Kuzma kind of pops up, and, we saw tonight his cutting, kind of his opportunism was helpful, and he hit a huge, random three late in the fourth quarter. That was a really big shot. And then, Kevin Porter Jr. in that kind of second unit with Giannis playing fewer minutes, we've seen the Bucks go to, or Doc Rivers choose to stagger Dame and Giannis less. They've been playing the vast majority of their minutes together. And I was definitely nervous about going into the fourth quarter tied, knowing that it was probably going to be, at least 4 or 5 minutes that they would have to survive without Giannis to start the fourth. Trae Young was in the game to start the fourth quarter, and it looked like the game might start to get away from them a little bit. But Kevin Porter Jr., as he's done now more often than not, has shown the ability to just kind of carry an offense by himself, basically. And he was huge there in that first half of the fourth quarter. And then, fortunately, Dame, Giannis come back. And, I mentioned Kuzma's big shot, but Giannis scored 4 points, but the playmaking, the big play to Brook Lopez. And then Dame, when they kind of had given up that 8-point lead, it gets tied. First, Giannis finds Brook on a pick and roll after Dame found Giannis, and then Dame just taking matters in his own hand with a tough reverse layup with one eye, which we'll talk a little bit about him battling that swollen eye that he was showing off post game. So yeah, again, not a dominant performance, not a wildly impressive performance per se. But, Atlanta has beaten a lot of good teams this year, and road wins haven't been at a premium for the Bucks, especially against opponents like the Atlanta Hawks. So I think you happily bank this one, and, you go into a second night of a back-to-back against a severely depleted Mavericks team tomorrow with a chance to, obviously, a golden opportunity to kind of continue to keep this kind of good run of form in terms of wins, losses, and, maintain your kind of tenuous hold on that 4 spot. So, not the best win in the world, but one that you definitely take and you live to fight another day.
14-16 on the road now, so inching closer and closer to 500. And the point you made too about the non-Giannis and Dame minutes, I don't know if I would qualify it as a disaster in the first half, but it wasn't good. They were outscored by 8. They outscored the Hawks by 5 in those minutes to start the fourth quarter, and that was almost entirely Kevin Porter Jr., who scored 12 of his 15 points in that stretch and had 2 and 1s in that stretch. So the talent is undeniable, and you continue to see the role that he has kind of carved out and how it makes sense for this group. But the larger point you made too about they don't have a clear-cut third scorer now since that trade. I mean, I suppose we could make the case or the argument they have concepts of a third scorer, but um, that to me is it's probably a larger conversation. But what has really stood out, really since coming out of the All-Star break, I mean, we can lump the Timberwolves game in there, but they didn't have all their personnel for that one. But as they've started to introduce the new pieces more and play a little bit differently, is maybe I'm being a prisoner of the moment. It doesn't feel like the offense is quite as stagnant as they had been in the past. Part of that is Kyle Kuzma's cutting. Part of that is Kevin Porter Jr.'s ability to go on stretches like this. Part of it too is just how you've, I don't think wholesale changed, but sprinkled in different uses for Brook Lopez too.
Yeah, I mean Brooks, we talked about it right going to the All-Star break, right? Brook was on kind of a tough run. He just looked like he was a step slow. The offense was, he had a slow start to the year offensively, then he really picked it up. Then it looked like he was again kind of lagging. A lot of games where it just felt like not really contributing, right? Which again, it's hard because on the one hand, obviously the ball is not going to find its way into his hands all the time. They're not going to, give him a ton of post looks or really try to run a lot of plays for him. But he was to me one of the guys that I think benefited a lot from the off time over the All-Star break, and he's come back. And I'd have to see what it is now. I know the other day when I checked, he was averaging 17 points a game on really high efficiency since the All-Star break. And as far as like how do you compensate for losing, more of a reliable sort of third option like Chris, and obviously Brook is not a playmaker the way Chris is. You're not going to run him as a pick and roll ball handler. I mean, same can be true really obviously for Kuzma as well. So it's really kind of just a combination of all these guys, I think has been the important part. Brook taking some of the pressure off of Dame Giannis with the starting group. And obviously, as you said, like Porter, in the non-Dame minutes, right? I mean, he kind of is the offense. I mean, in
Yeah.
terms of like shot creation, and I'd ask you, Justin, like what do you do with his minutes? Like, I've had a few people ask the question of like, he's obviously played well enough to quote unquote earn more minutes in a traditional sense, but I also just kind of struggle with the idea of like he
Where are they
needs
going
the
to come from?
ball. Well, he
Yeah.
needs the ball, yeah, and and
Yeah.
and so if he's out there with Dame, I guess you could say, well, he's a guy that you could put the ball in his hands to bring the ball up. We've seen Dame operate a lot more, not bringing the ball up the floor, especially when the other team has a ball hawk like a Dyson Daniels that other people can bring the ball up, whether it's Giannis or
Yeah.
others. So maybe there's a version of the Bucks where you could get some minutes for KPJ with Dame. He's in the past has shown some spot up ability that we haven't necessarily really seen so far. But part of me also is just like, look, like the goal here is not to like get Kevin Porter
To
Jr.
highlight him. Yeah.
The biggest contract he can get next summer. Like I think the point is to maximize sort of the 48 minutes that you have, and his ability to kind of just be the microwave guy in 15 minutes a game has worked really well. And so I think maybe that just gives you more flexibility to play Dame less, the rest of the way, and to give him some more, nights off,
Yeah.
potentially like this Mavericks game, right? This seems like a kind of classic game that you would potentially rest Dame in. So we'll see. But I think, again, it's hard to argue with the results. He's had a few games where he just looks awful, but then in all the other games, he's
Yeah.
Kevin Porter Jr.'s look great,
Yeah, there's
So
no middle. Yeah, it's
yeah.
either it's one extreme or the other. Yeah, some additional thoughts on that. You mentioned the opportunity to get some rest, so it is quite an extensive injury report for the Dallas Mavericks for the game that the Bucks have coming up as well. And some of the updates that we've seen to one of the big areas that is it's been a big talking point, and the Bucks' fourth quarter efficiencies, what we've started to see in an albeit small sample size since the All-Star break. We'll get into that conversation coming up next on Locked On Bucks. Running a small business means you're wearing a lot of hats. Your personal phone becomes your business phone. And before you know it, you're juggling customer calls day and night. As your team grows, it becomes impossible to manage everything with just your personal number. That's where Open Phone comes in. It is the number one business phone system designed to help you keep your work and personal lives separate. For just $15 a month, the cost of only a few coffees, you get complete transparency, visibility into everything happening with your business phone number. Open Phone works through an app on your phone or computer and integrates with tools like HubSpot and hundreds of others. It uses AI powered call transcripts and summaries, so you'll have a rundown of your calls and action items the second you hang up. And if you miss a call, no problem. Automated messages are sent directly to your customer, ensuring you never miss an opportunity to engage. Right now, Open Phone is offering 20% off for your first 6 months when you go to openphone.com/lockedonnba. That is openphone.com/lockedonnba for 20% off 6 months. Openphone.com/lockedonnba. If you have existing numbers with another service, Open Phone will port them over at no additional charge. Head right now to openphone.com/lockedonnba to score 20% off for your first 6 months. Yeah, so it's just the last thing I'd say. Yeah, I don't like. I think it's this is the right mix that we have of Kevin Porter Jr. and where we need him in games when he has it. Then you can explore. Okay, we can either stagger when we bring back Dame, or we can look into should we play him on the floor with Damian Lillard. But I think especially when you get into the challenge or in the playoffs, the challenge you're going to have is the big thing in terms of a negative in that trade, the Kuzma trade, is the shooting. And he's going to be a guy that teams are going to elect to leave open. I'm not saying Kevin Porter Jr. is a bad shooter, but I do think in those spots you would much rather have even an AJ Green or a Gary Trent Jr. type of player out there on the floor in those minutes.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that we've seen over the years, right? Like to be the fifth guy in the Bucks starting rotation, right? We've had, you know, pretty remarkable stability and at least like obviously you had a major difference going from Drew Holiday to Damian Lillard, but in either way, right, you have like a very a lead guard who obviously needs a lot of shots, and then around that, we've obviously seen a lot of stability in terms of the guys that play with that, and now obviously taking Chris out of the equation, right, first by putting him on the bench, and now obviously with him no longer being here, that's obviously another sort of huge change, right? Probably the biggest change that they've made. And I think the fact that you have Dame, obviously, that increases. I mean, you can absorb, those possessions in a way that maybe you couldn't when you had Drew, because Dame's just a higher usage guy alongside Giannis, right? I mean, these are kind of two of the highest usage types of players that you'd see in the league, right? I don't know if there is a higher usage duo. We know there's not a higher scoring duo in the league than these guys. Um, yeah, I think the reality is like there's never going to be tons of shots for like like the fourth and fifth options. I think with the current group, I would say Taurean Prince becomes the obvious guy who just like doesn't get a whole lot of shots, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I think he's probably become I'll say this, not that I watch tons of Taurean Prince. I've been pleasantly surprised by how quick his trigger has become this year, in part
Yeah.
because, I think he's had a lot of confidence shooting from three, but he's a pretty low volume 3-point shooter for a guy who's as accurate as he is. Even with, kind of that quicker release. And that's just because the ball doesn't get to him that much, right? Because the other guys do soak up a lot of possessions. So yeah, I agree. I think it's kind of, harder to find shots. And I think, Kuzma, I think, has started to do kind of that like intangible stuff, right? That again, you can't just draw up a play and say like, all right, Kuz, go cut for a layup here, right? I mean, it kind of has to happen in the flow of the game. But I think we've seen, at least once or twice a game, that ability to read a defense and either cut from the corner, or a late cut or a V cut or something like that when someone's driving to the paint. So I think Kuz is kind of starting to figure out a little bit like how he plays, with Giannis and how he benefits from that. I thought one of the best plays of the night was a very unpredictable Taurean Prince bullet pass from the left wing to Kuz, like threading the needle off an ATO. I think if they ran that play, 100 times, like maybe it would work like three times, but it was an and one for Kuz on that play. So yeah, we'll see. I mean, again, like it's been interesting, the starting five with this jumbo starting five, like they were plus 11 coming in this game. I'd have to see what they were. The starters were generally positive in this game, so I'm guessing that probably wasn't bad. Maybe they were slightly positive again. But they've had some good opponent 3-point shooting luck. So I have a hard time using that as like proof of concept that like, oh, the jumbo starting five is like the answer to all the Bucks problems. Again, if it were up to me, I still would put either AJ or Gary Trent in the starting five and do something a little more traditional. But the bench unit has worked really well, right? With those guys coming off the bench and being kind of those, dueling banjos, 3-point shooters. One of them always seems to be good on any given night.
Yeah.
It's been interesting to watch. And I think that's sort of the thing, right? Is I think we've seen with Doc playing Ajax for I don't know how many dozens of games in a row and keeping with that group, even though they were not playing well as a collective, right? The starters were always negative with Ajax, but he stuck with it because they were generally winning games. So I'm guessing that's going to be continue what we'll see here, so long as they're racking up W's. So we'll see. After the Kuzma trade, I thought like maybe just going big is like the way that maybe they create an advantage. So we'll have to see if that's a reliable thing. But I do think tonight it was interesting. I thought they gang tackled Trae Young pretty well. I thought Kuzma, actually Kevin Porter had some of the best possessions defensively against him. So I'm not going to say like Taurean Prince like is the reason why he shot 37% from the field or something like that. But I didn't think that, it's not like he was abusing Prince either. I thought Taurean did a pretty solid job.
He held up. Yeah.
He held up. And, Trae is definitely the kind of guard who like you would not expect this jumbo lineup to work against. So credit to them, right? Credit to Prince and kind of the rest of this defense for kind of keeping its shape well enough. And, it wasn't like just a cascade of alley-oop dunks all night or anything like that. I thought even though the Hawks scored a ton of points, they had a 3-point advantage, right? Bucks usually don't overcome that, but they overcame the fact that the Hawks shot a better percentage from three, made more threes. But I thought the Bucks, generally kind of, again, I don't know if it's saying it's a bend but don't break defense is what we saw tonight, because there was a lot of bending. But I think some of that was just sort of, especially perimeter shot making, and certainly the Hawks also did, even with the high scoring total. I mean, the Hawks missed a ton of layups, which maybe some of that is rim protection from the Bucks, but some of it,
I mean, that was my question too at the time this game started. Is this going to be, and I know Doc has talked a little bit to as recently as a week or so ago about, well, TP is still kind of getting over an ankle issue. So we tried to watch his minutes a little bit, and we know some of these might be challenges against those types of guys like a Trae Young. But yeah, that was the initial thought too of, I don't know, this kind of feels like you probably need to lean on a guy like a Gary Trent a little more and see more AJ Green to hold up there. Trae Young, I mean, 28 points, but 24 shots to get there. I do think you have to point out all the personnel that's been taken off the roster. And does this look differently if those guys were out there in a game, like was played the first 2 games against the Hawks or 3 games against the Hawks? Who knows? Maybe. But yeah, you at least, Taurean Prince held up. And, I don't think we really have any issues or questions about the defense. The big piece is the offense. And started to see some movement in a category that's come under fire for the Bucks in one number specifically. We'll get into that. We've tiptoed around the Mavs and that injury report, which is something else. We'll get into that conversation coming up as well. Up next on Locked On Bucks. This next segment of Locked On Bucks is brought to you by BetterHelp. Who is in your support system? We all need people to lean on, whether it's friends, family, mentors, or professionals. Even the strongest leaders and athletes know that asking for help makes them better. Therapy is one of the best ways to build a strong support system. It's not just for tough times. It helps with setting boundaries, developing coping skills, and becoming the best version of yourself. You can see firsthand how valuable it is to have a support system that keeps you grounded and motivated. You can lean on therapy during crisis moments. It's a tool for self-improvement, stress management, and navigating life's challenges. BetterHelp is fully online, making it easier than ever to connect with a licensed therapist from anywhere. With over 30,000 professionals available, you can find the right fit and switch at any time at no extra cost. Build your support system with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedonnba today to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedonnba. So there's been much made about the Bucks' fourth quarter offense, and the Brooklyn Nets tonight lose to the San Antonio Spurs, score 113 points, but they had a relatively strong fourth quarter, so they have pulled back in front of the Bucks. So as we sit here now, Frank, the Bucks still have the number 30 fourth quarter offense in the league, and it may just be too far gone. I mean, 28th is the Houston Rockets, and they're 3 points per 100 possessions better than the Bucks right now. That, in looking at that overall number, I mean, best case scenario, maybe you move up to 25th by the end of the season. But if we just look at it since not only the trade deadline, but that Timberwolves game, and again, the caveat is you didn't have everybody, you didn't have Giannis, like you were still piecing things together, but you won and you played pretty well down the stretch of that game. Since then, the Bucks have been much better in the fourth quarter. Both, defense has been even better than it was before. Offense has continued to get better as well. So from that date on, Bucks have a 120.1 offensive rating. That's 11th in the league in the fourth quarter, and the 8th best defensive rating in the fourth quarter. So the overall number might not move a lot, but if you continue to do what we've seen here, albeit a small sample size, like that is the thing to keep an eye on. Okay, now that they've fit all these pieces in and have started to see how this works, how do the numbers look since then?
Yeah, I mean, I think with this too, if looking at like clutch numbers and things like that, I think the other day when I looked at the clutch numbers, the offense was really bad, but the defense was really good too.
Yeah.
So, it's like, what do you really take from that? Like, do you look at that and say the Bucks are not talented enough, or don't have the personnel to be good offensively in fourth quarters? I mean, I don't think any of us would look at it that way. It doesn't really make much sense. I'm looking at the clutch stats, right? Which again, the clutch numbers are 114 minutes, right? It's literally like not even 3 full games worth of minutes over the course of 2/3 of a season. It's kind of a drop in the bucket. And the Bucks are 98 offensive rating, which is of course terrible, third from the bottom there. But their defensive rating is second, 99.6 if I use the NBA.com stats, right? Behind only the Magic. So, what do I take from that? Do I take from that the Bucks' true selves are, terrible offensively, but they're a juggernaut defensively? No, I don't believe, that's not what I would conclude from that. I think it's a lot of probably just, funky late game offense and some bad luck. And, it's not like when you think about who they're playing, right? It's not like they were playing Ajax in a bunch of crunch time minutes, right?
Yeah.
AJ Green, Gary Trent are the guys I think that are 4th and 5th in terms of total, I think clutch minutes played for the Bucks this year. And so they're playing guys who are very, are floor stretchers who have overall during the season, especially AJ has been sort of a plus minus darling. So I don't feel like you really stress a whole lot about it. Do I have the utmost confidence that Doc Rivers is the, offensive guru with that staff that, is going to unlock all the push all the right buttons late in games? Like, well, look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you like that I fully believe that either. But at the end of the day, I think offense in particular ultimately is just a talent question, and especially in clutch situations, it generally comes down to, are my top 2 or 3 players better than your top 2 or 3 players? And if you think about like what the Bucks' strengths are, it's that fact, right? It's that our two best players are going to be better than the vast majority of the opponent's two best players, right? So yeah, I don't know that there's a whole lot to do with that data right now. I think they've generally played the right guys for the most part late in games. Um, so I think, I don't really stress about the late game offense. I think it's kind of a little fluky that it hasn't worked better than it has. And certainly also, what we've seen in the sample too, like the Houston game where they score 0 points in the first 6 minutes, like, well, Giannis and Dame basically I don't think played basically any of that time either. So
Yeah.
so I think some of that also is probably reflective of just like the rotations that they've had here, and of late, I know it's been a bit better, but I also don't want to count on KPJ shooting 100%, and scoring 12 points every fourth quarter as he did tonight. So I wouldn't really stress about the fourth quarter scoring. To me, I think ultimately, like, they've got the tools and the guys to score, and you just hope that the trust in that and the health allows you to, when it matters, that they're going to have the guys available that we can believe in.
So you got the Dallas Mavericks coming up later tonight now, and their injury report initially submitted has 8 players. 7 of them are listed as out. 1 is doubtful. None of them are two-way players. Like, these are all regulars. So as banged up as they were Saturday, it's going to be even worse in the game later on tonight. Obviously, Kyrie Irving out for the remainder of the season. I would imagine he's out for all of next season as well. And just the larger conversation, what does this mean for Dallas? Anthony Davis is out. Daniel Gafford is out. Derek Lively is out. PJ Washington, I saw FanDuel used him on the graphic, knowing like, well, other bigs are out and Kyrie was hurt, so let's focus on PJ Washington. He's out for the Mavericks too. So up and down the roster, if you can name a player on the Mavericks outside of Klay Thompson, he is very likely out in this game. You mentioned it before. I'm curious to see what this means for rest. Like, I know it's night 2 of a back-to-back. Do you lean into this with the schedule you have in front of you and say, let's make sure we get this? Or do you lean in the other way and say, there's an opportunity for us to get an equal amount of rest for guys like Dame and possibly even Brook Lopez, now that you got Jericho Sims on board, and okay, this is what Dallas is putting out there, we're going to do something similar?
My prediction, I'm not going to say go, do daily fantasy based on this prediction, but my prediction will be that Giannis plays, and I'll say maybe Dame gets the night off, and I think Brook Lopez always plays, so I just assume he's going to play. So yeah, I think probably the one I'm least sure about is maybe Kuzma, because I mean he was doubtful for this game leading up to
this
it because
morning,
of the ankle that he rolled coming down, but just a bad luck play where he stepped on Giannis's foot on a rebound the other night. But obviously he played, and I certainly would not have known that he had any sort of ankle issue based on how he played tonight, right? I thought he was good. I mean, again, like watching him like dance with Trae Young, defend him well, certainly didn't look like a guy that was lacking confidence in his lower limbs. So my prediction will be Dame sits. I mean, the comments he made after the game about, like he got knocked in the head, and then he goes to the bench like, yeah, I was like seeing like 3, and then they just told me to go back out there, so I like went out there. It was like they just told you, like, okay, I don't know that that's what the training staff would say happened exactly. I'm guessing Dame didn't want to come out, but yeah, it was definitely a little bit of a scary moment, because I don't know what you were thinking, Justin. I was a little worried he might, is this like a concussion situation?
Right? Yep.
Which I can't remember if that happened last year or when that happened with him, but I know he missed
a
couple
this
games
year, wasn't it?
It could be. I don't remember.
I think was it against Miami? It was when the official hit him on the 3-point.
Oh yeah, that's right. And then I think he missed like a couple games, I want to say, with the concussion. So yeah, that was my concern, but yeah, so I'll guess maybe they hold him out that game. And I think what we saw, I don't know if it was the last back-to-back, but remember he sat out the second night of a back-to-back and Giannis played. Was it the Washington game maybe?
Yes. Yeah.
Or I think Washington was somehow involved with it. But And I think the other thing, which the reason why I think Giannis will play, I think two things, right? I think Giannis and the Bucks are very aware of him needing to get to 64
60,
games
yeah.
to qualify for All NBA and all the awards. And again, I know some people say like, "Oh, Giannis doesn't care about awards, doesn't care about stats." He cares about that stuff.
Cares about cares
He
about money too.
I'm here for it. I'm a Giannis stat geek, so I mean, what he's been able to do as far as like All NBA honors and year in and year out, like being a guy that has just racked up an incredible resume. Like
Yeah.
I get it, So I think I was just doing the math right. So the Bucks, I think, have they've played 60 games, right? So they have 22 games left, and Giannis, I think, is at 48 games played because the final of the NBA Cup counts towards the eligibility. It doesn't count as a regular season game, but because it counts
Okay.
towards his awards eligibility, which is like a good little wrinkle. Like
Yeah.
I didn't realize
Yeah.
that until Tim Bontemps reported that a little while ago. But so he only needs to get to 64 regular season games in order to hit the minimum for awards eligibility. So he needs to play in 16 of the
16
last
of the
22
22.
games.
Yeah.
So I think, and I was also talking to Eric, and I was sort of asking, I was like, "Oh, what do you think about how Giannis is doing?" And he was just like, "I think he's mad he's not playing more. He's mad about his minutes limit." So which made me happy because I think we're all concerned. Is the calf still bothering him?
Yeah.
He missed a dunk tonight, which I think it was his left hand, so it was like a righty
Yep.
jump, so it
Yep.
wasn't his left calf. But it seems like he's been missing dunks here really over the last like couple months at a rate that's been a bit surprising. So I think it's fair to wonder a little bit, like, is he, physically, like, where is he? Is he still maybe getting rid of some rust? I don't know. So of course, the first rule obviously is the first thing you're shooting for is his health. But I think he's healthy. I don't think the team thinks he's like, perilously on the verge of restraining his calf or something like that. But I do think, again, the games played thing, I think, does matter to them. And also, let's be honest, like if the Bucks just like rest, Dame, Giannis, and Kuzma, I'd like to think that yes, I mean, I think they would be favored against this version of the Mavericks, but like you start to that starts to put a lot more scenarios in play if you just like rest everybody, because then
Yeah.
suddenly, like, okay, if you lose that game because you got too cute with your rest scenarios,
Yeah.
especially given you have a couple days off after this, right? So you do
Yeah.
have a little bit of a favorable schedule right now. So yeah, I would be reasonable, but I wouldn't try to get too cute with it. So yeah, I'll guess Dame sits, and Giannis plays, and probably Kuzma is the biggest question mark.
As we wrap here, any idea the significance behind November 28th, 2014, when the Bucks played and beat the Detroit Pistons? Why I would bring that up in advance of the Bucks Mavericks game?
November 28th, 2014 against the Detroit Pistons, you say?
Yes.
So that must have been, so that was the 14-15 season. So that was Jason
Yep.
Kidd's first year in Milwaukee, about a month into his
Yeah.
first year in Milwaukee. And so I'm trying to think what would have been happening that would have been significant, that would also be relevant to the Dallas Mavericks. I'm not sure. What is it?
So last night, the Dallas Mavericks lost to the Sacramento Kings, or what? Monday night, they lose to the Kings by 24 points. And it was a game where the starting lineup for the Dallas Mavericks contributed, 75 points came from the bench. So their starting lineup scored 23 points. No starter scored in double figures. Every single player that entered the game from the bench scored more than every player in the starting lineup. The last time that happened was when the Bucks beat the Pistons November 28th, 2014. And the starting five for the Bucks was Larry Sanders, Jabari Parker, Giannis, Brandon Knight, and OJ Mayo, and no one scored more than 8 points.
Wow. Wait, and the Bucks, did you say the Bucks won this game?
The Bucks won, yes.
Wow.
Thanks to Ersan Ilyasova's efforts and his 22 points off the
Of course,
bench.
we should not see if The funny part is that game made me think of the famous John Henson, Matt Barnes ejection game, because I was at that game against
Yeah.
I guess the Memphis Grizzlies it was.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I'm trying to remember even what year that was, but that game I remembered because Giannis and all the starters were benched the entire fourth quarter.
Yeah.
And the Bucks came back, and it was I dug this up recently, but the like basically the lineup that played essentially the entire fourth quarter involved John Henson, Damian Inglis was prominently involved, Tyler Ennis was prominently involved. Like it is some crazy, like there's some crazy names of people that we do not think of as having had very positive experiences in Milwaukee.
Kendall Marshall was big in this one
Kendall
with
Marshall
9 points and 8 assists.
there you go.
Jared Bayless with 10 points. So yeah, John Henson did not get into the game that day. Neither did our guy Nate Walters. But yeah, that's the last time we had an NBA game where every single player off the bench scored more points than any player in the starting lineup. The Bucks did it in their win against the Pistons. So yeah, it should be interesting to see the injury report for the Bucks when they submit it and how they choose to tackle this one. But the important part is the Bucks win on a night where the Pacers win. So you keep the pace there and set up 2 very big showdowns in a week now, with the Bucks in Indiana on March 11th and then hosting the Pacers March 16th. So just win one of those 2 games and you secure the head-to-head tiebreaker against Indiana, which we'll get into all the seeding possibilities for the Bucks and the whole tired, hey, where's it best to finish talk as we get closer. But yes, a very big stretch of scheduling coming up for the Bucks. As this was kind of the pocket where you look at the injuries the Mavs have, you look at the fact the Hawks are below 500, even the Magic this weekend, another back-to-back, but they're going to be without Jalen Suggs for the rest of the year. So like that's your lead up into where it really, where it really picks up. And you have the Cavs on night 2 and then 2 games with the Pacers and your West Coast road trip. So win as many of these games in the interim is the important part. And that's what the Bucks have been doing of late. So yeah, we'll see if they can keep it rolling through tomorrow night or tonight, depending on when you listen to this, when they take on the very, very shorthanded Dallas Mavericks. That'll do it for tonight's show. For Frank, I'm Justin. We'll talk with you guys once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.